she laughed. He's the family mistake. I just slipped off my wedding ring and walked away. Before I dive in, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment. Your support keeps these stories alive. I remember the night like it was carved into glass. The ballroom smelled of champagne and roses, lights scattering across the chandeliers as music hummed in the background. I stood at the table with a glass of whiskey in my hand, trying to smile through the tension that always curled up whenever I was with my wife's family. They were the kind of people who lived on sharp jokes and careful whispers, and I had learned to swallow more than a few of them over the years. But that night, something changed. My wife, Emily, leaned close to her sister Charlotte, radiant in her white gown, and in a voice just loud enough to echo across the table, she said, "Well, at least you didn't marry the family mistake." Laughter followed. Sharp, cruel, unrelenting. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt every eye swing toward me. The grooms, the brides, her parents, cousins I barely knew. My face burned hot, but my chest went cold hollow. I didn't say a word. Not one. I simply set down my drink, slipped the ring from my finger, and placed it gently on the linen cloth in front of me. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then I walked away. Through the golden-lit hall, past the polished doors, out into the night where the air was sharp and alive. No one stopped me. Not Emily. Not her family. Not a soul. I didn't look back. The days that followed blurred. I packed a bag. I vanished. My phone buzzed with calls, then slowed, then went silent. I didn't explain myself. Didn't argue. Didn't fight. I let the world think what it wanted. There was a strange freedom in that. The silence, the absence, the sudden weightlessness of not belonging to a family that never wanted me. For the first time in years, I breathed without apology. But the quiet wasn't peace. Not at first. It was raw, jagged, a wound that ached in the dark hours. I had given years of my life, only to be laughed at like a stranger. I remembered the smirks, the rolling eyes at dinners, the subtle dismissals, the way Emily always seemed to enjoy their little digs at me. As if I were a character in their private play, the joke they all understood. And that night, she crowned it with her words, the family mistake. I drifted. Motels, rented apartments, cities where nobody knew my name. I worked with my hands at first, day jobs, heavy lifting, anything to keep from thinking too much. My body grew strong, harder than it had been in years, and slowly my spirit caught up. The ache dulled, replaced with a kind of clarity. I was free, and in that freedom, I began to see myself again, not as they had painted me, but as I truly was. I met people who didn't know my story, who didn't look at me with suspicion or pity. People who laughed with me, not at me. I found work that suited me, opportunities that grew because I seized them, because I refused to be the quiet man at the table anymore. The more I shed the shadow of that old life, the brighter the new one became. And yet, late at night, when the world went still, I sometimes saw Emily's face, her lips curled in that mocking smile. The family mistake. It echoed, but it no longer crushed me. It fueled me. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't dream of proving myself to them. No, what I wanted was simpler, to live so far beyond their little stage that their words meant nothing. To write my own story, one laugh at a time, one step at a time, until the man they had mocked was gone forever. That was the beginning of my year in exile. A year of silence, of rebuilding, of becoming something I had never been allowed to be. And it all started with that moment at the wedding, with her words slicing through me, and my ring lying silent on the white tablecloth. I woke up one morning in a small apartment above a diner in a town where nobody cared about my last name, and I realized something important. I hadn't heard my own laughter in months. Not the polite chuckle I used at that wedding table, not the strained smile I gave at dinners with Emily's family, but real laughter that came from inside me. It scared me a little, the silence of my own joy. I had been living like a ghost, drifting from place to place, taking jobs that kept my hands busy but my heart empty. I carried the memory of that night like a stone in my pocket, always there, always heavy, but I didn't know what to do with it. The turning point came at that diner downstairs. A man named Michael, a mechanic with grease under his nails and eyes that carried a lifetime of tired stories, sat across from me one morning and said, "You look like you're running from something." I didn't answer, but he smiled like he already knew. Doesn't matter what it is. You just gotta make sure you're running towards something better. His words stuck with me. They were simple, almost careless, but they cut through the fog I had been living in. Running away was easy. Building something new, that was the challenge. I started to push myself. I took a construction job that demanded strength, sweat, and discipline. My body hardened, my back straightened, and for the first time in years, I felt capable. Every brick I laid, every beam I lifted, it was like piecing myself back together. I worked long days and came home exhausted, but it was the kind of exhaustion that made me proud. I wasn't the family mistake here. I was just a man doing his job and doing it well. Money began to stack slowly in my account. I moved into a better place, nothing fancy, but mine. A little apartment with windows that caught the morning sun. I bought secondhand furniture, hung up a clock on the wall, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the ground beneath me solid. And then there was Rachel. I met her at the grocery store, of all places. She had auburn hair that caught the light, and she laughed easily, not the sharp, cutting kind of laugh I had grown used to, but warm, like music. We bumped carts in the aisle, and she apologized even though it was my fault. I found myself lingering in that store longer than I needed to, just to keep talking with her. She was different. She didn't ask about my past, didn't pry, just saw me as I was in that moment. With her, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt alive. We started seeing each other, slowly at first, then more. Coffee dates, long walks, nights spent talking until dawn. She listened without judgment, and when I finally told her pieces of what had happened, she didn't laugh. She just looked at me with steady eyes and said, "That doesn't sound like a mistake to me. That sounds like someone else's cruelty." It was the first time anyone had put it that way. I began to heal in her presence. With Rachel, I wasn't defined by Emily's words or her family's sneers. I was just me, and that was enough. Work kept growing too. I moved up, started managing crews, making decisions, taking on responsibility. The man who once sat silent at family dinners was now giving orders on job sites, and men respected me. I wore that respect like armor. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Stronger, straighter, eyes that didn't flinch. Nights were filled with laughter again, the real kind, the kind that shook out of me without effort. I realized I hadn't lost myself at that wedding. I had been hiding all along, buried under years of trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. One evening, Rachel and I sat on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights stretching out below us. She turned to me and asked softly, "Do you ever miss them?" I thought about it for a long time. The truth was complicated. I missed the idea of family, the way I had wanted it to be. But I didn't miss their stares, their whispers, their knives disguised as jokes. I told her, I miss who I thought they were, not who they really are. She nodded, as if she understood more than I said. The year rolled on, and with every month, I built a little more of myself back. The man they once dismissed had grown into someone else entirely, someone they would hardly recognize. And yet, the memory of that ring on the table, of Emily's laughter echoing in the ballroom, never faded. It stayed with me, not as pain anymore, but as a reminder of who I had been and who I refused to be again. That was my year of transformation, carved from silence, sweat, and the surprising gift of new love. I hadn't planned it. I hadn't sought it. But it came, and I embraced it, piece by piece, until I was whole again. It was almost a full year since the night I walked out, and though I never marked the exact date, my body seemed to know. The air grew warmer, the flowers bloomed again, and suddenly every sound of laughter on the street tugged at that memory of the wedding. I told myself I was free, and it was true. I had built a new life, brick by brick. Yet there was a part of me that carried a quiet restlessness, as if unfinished business was waiting somewhere in the shadows. I didn't talk about it much with Rachel. She had given me space, never pressing me to explain more than I wanted, but she saw through me anyway. One evening, she set her glass of wine down, looked at me across the table, and said, "You don't have to tell me, but whatever's still haunting you, it's not going to disappear until you face it." Her words landed heavier than I expected. She was right. I had buried the hurt, rebuilt myself, even thrived. But the wound that opened that night had been carved in front of a whole family, and it lingered because it had never been answered. For months, I had avoided their calls, ignored letters, and cut off any thread that might lead me back. But life has a way of circling around. The invitation came in a plain envelope slipped under my door by mistake at first glance. It looked like junk mail. Inside, a card with embossed letters announced a family gathering. It wasn't just any gathering. It was an anniversary party for Emily's parents. Their names gleamed in gold on the front, and in the list of invitees, mine was still included, as though I had never left. For a long while, I sat staring at it. I could have thrown it away, pretended it never found me, continued my quiet triumph in silence. But something inside me shifted. Not anger, not bitterness, but a calm, steady sense of resolve. I wasn't the same man who had walked out of that ballroom in humiliation. I had changed, hardened, grown. And maybe it was time to let them see it. The decision wasn't easy. Rachel watched me wrestle with it, silent until I asked what she thought. She smiled softly and said, "If you go, go as yourself. Not as the man they broke, but the man you are now." That night, I barely slept. Memories pressed against my mind, sharp and unwelcome. The looks, the whispers, the sound of Emily's laughter. But alongside them came the voice of the foreman who respected my work, the warmth of Rachel's hand in mine, the laughter of new friends who knew nothing of my past. By morning, my choice was made. On the day of the gathering, I dressed carefully, not to impress them, but to show the truth of who I had become. A well-tailored suit, shoes polished, my shoulders squared without effort. Rachel stood beside me, radiant in a simple dress that needed no ornament. When I looked at her, I felt something I had never known at that wedding: certainty. We arrived at the hall where the celebration was held, and I felt dozens of eyes land on me the moment we walked in. Conversation slowed, a hush rippled through the crowd, and I saw faces I hadn't seen in a year, astonishment painted across them. No one had expected me to return. Emily was there, of course. She wore a dress that glittered under the lights, her smile wide and practiced as she spoke with cousins and aunts. But when she noticed me, her face froze, just for a second, before she forced it back into place. My heart thudded once, hard, but I didn't falter. Rachel's arm brushed mine, steadying me without a word. The first moments were the hardest. The family buzzed with whispers, the kind people think you can't hear, but always do. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others stared openly, their eyes searching for the broken man who had once left in silence. But he wasn't there anymore. I shook hands, nodded, spoke calmly with those who approached me. I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. Every gesture carried a quiet authority that came not from anger, but from knowing exactly who I was. Emily's parents approached after a while, their expressions caught somewhere between surprise and awkward welcome. They stumbled through polite words, and I returned them with a steady tone. They didn't apologize, of course. That wasn't their way. But I could see the questions in their eyes. How had I changed so much? How had I returned stronger when they had expected me to vanish for good? Emily stayed at a distance most of the night, her laughter sharper than usual, her movements restless. She avoided my gaze, and I didn't chase it. I didn't need to. For the first time, the balance had shifted. I was no longer the outsider begging for a place at their table. I was a man who could walk in, stand tall, and take the room's silence as respect rather than scorn. Hours passed, the party carried on, music filled the space, and I moved through it with ease, Rachel always at my side. The looks continued, the whispers too, but none of it cut me anymore. If anything, it was a strange kind of triumph. I had walked back into the very place where my dignity had been torn from me, and instead of crumbling, I had stood firm. I could see it in their eyes: confusion, unease, maybe even admiration. The man they once laughed at had returned, but he was not the same man at all. As the evening stretched on, I felt the weight of eyes following me wherever I moved, like shadows that couldn't keep up with the man I had become. Rachel's hand in mine anchored me, steady and calm, her presence a quiet defiance against the sea of people who once smirked at my expense. The band played soft jazz in the background. Waiters glided with trays of champagne, and yet the air was thick, not with celebration, but with the unspoken question of what I would do. I hadn't come with a plan. I hadn't rehearsed speeches or imagined confrontations. I only knew that silence was no longer my prison. When I finally crossed paths with Emily, it happened as if the crowd parted for us. She stood near the bar, her glass trembling ever so slightly in her hand, though her smile tried to hold steady. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the noise of the room fading into something distant. Her eyes darted to Rachel, then back to me, searching for some trace of the man she had humiliated. She didn't find him. She opened her mouth, maybe to offer some brittle remark or a forced greeting, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. And in that silence, I spoke, not loud, not sharp, but clear enough that those nearest us turned their heads. I said, "Now you have a different driver." Nothing more. No anger, no theatrics. Just that. Her lips pressed tight, her face drained of the triumphant glow she wore a year ago. Around us, people shifted uneasily, their curiosity turning into something heavier. For the first time, she was the one left standing in silence, and I was the one walking away. Rachel and I moved back into the crowd, but the energy of the night had changed. Conversations faltered whenever I passed, as though everyone was reconsidering what they thought they knew. I didn't need to bask in it. I didn't need their approval. The victory was in the simplicity of being untouchable, in showing them without words that I was no longer defined by their cruelty. Later in the evening, as the family gathered for speeches and toasts, I listened quietly. Their words about loyalty, love, and tradition rang hollow in my ears, because I knew the truth behind their polished image. But I didn't sneer, didn't interrupt. I sat with Rachel's hand resting lightly on my arm, and I realized something freeing. Their opinion no longer mattered. They could whisper, they could speculate, they could twist their stories in private corners, but none of it could touch me anymore. When the night drew to a close, people lined up to say their farewells. Some avoided me entirely, slipping away quickly, unwilling to face the mirror I had become for them. Others approached cautiously, offering polite smiles and words that carried an edge of respect they had never given before. And then there were a few, cousins, distant relatives, who looked at me with something closer to admiration, as if they wished they had found the courage to stand their ground in their own lives. Emily didn't come to me again. She lingered near the exit, her gaze flicking toward me more than once. But when I looked back, she turned away. Whatever words she wanted to say stayed locked inside her, and I left her to wrestle with them alone. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the scent of rain on the horizon. Rachel slipped her arm around mine and smiled up at me, not with triumph, but with pride. "You didn't need to prove anything," she said softly. "But I think they finally saw the truth." I nodded, not because I needed validation, but because she was right. The truth had been visible in every glance, every silence, every unsettled shift of their bodies when they realized the man who had left in quiet shame had returned unbroken. On the drive home, the city lights slid past the windows, and I thought about how far I had come in 1 year. From the night of humiliation to the strength of walking back into their world with my head high. The journey had remade me. I was no longer the man defined by someone else's laughter. I was no longer the family mistake. I was a man who had chosen his own path, who had built himself back from nothing, who had found love that healed instead of wounded. And that was enough. When I finally closed my eyes that night, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Not because of revenge, not because of any victory, but because I was free, truly free. The past no longer chained me. The future was mine to shape. If you've listened this far, I want to thank you. Stories like this carry pieces of all of us, the hurt, the loss, the rebuilding. If you want to hear more stories of resilience and transformation, make sure to subscribe, click that like button, and leave a comment. Tell me if you've ever walked away from a place that tried to break you, and how you found your way back stronger. Your story matters, too.